So, I haven't done a video since Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers came out, and that's basically because I've been sitting and listening to it over and over again, basically non-stop for the last 3 weeks. I wanted to just sit with it and shut the fuck up as much as possible so I can try and gather my thoughts as best as possible, which is what this video is going to be. As I'm sure you're very aware of, this new Kendrick album has sparked a lot of debate, controversy, excitement, all across the board. And as a humongous, gigantic Kendrick Lamar stan, I've tried my best to be as objective as possible. And some of the themes that the album brings up actually forced me to do that. But it has been hard because I've been sitting waiting for 5 years for Kendrick to drop. I think the first thing I want to touch upon with Mr. Morale is that more so than any other Kendrick album, the context of the preceding projects is so important. If Good Kid, Mad City, for example, is the first Kendrick album or project that you've ever heard, you can sit with it, enjoy it, because it's a wholly cohesive, watertight narrative. Same with To Pimp a Butterfly as well. Of course, having that prior knowledge of Kendrick's rise to fame in the preceding years will help with understanding some of the themes of that record, but on the most part, it's something you can enjoy in a vacuum. Like I mentioned in my reaction to Mr. Morale, Damn, I think is such a pivotal moment for Kendrick, particularly with this point as well, because I don't really think you can... I mean, you can, of course. You know, I'm not trying to gatekeep Kendrick Lamar, literally one of the biggest rappers walking on the planet. But one of the core themes of Damn is a question to himself and a rebuttal to the idea of, you know, he's this holier-than-thou figure that gave us To Pimp a Butterfly. I'm going to come down on every other rapper's level and talk my shit and still make it sexy. And that is maybe one of the first things that struck me about Mr. Morale, is that he's followed through with that idea of really, really honing in and questioning his own image, his own legacy, and his own intentions in the rap game for the past 10 years. And that is why, for me, Mr. Morale is the most, kind of without question, the most personal Kendrick album ever. This veil of, you know, Kendrick having this wide, massive scope, looking at the world's issues and not even trying to fix them, just trying to bring up these important questions and questions that are still important today. But him focusing his life's work on those questions has, if we're going to take what he says on Mr. Morale seriously, it's hindered his family life and him dealing with his own trauma, and also him questioning his own savior complex, which is, I think, something that's arisen as a result of a two-way dynamic between himself and his fans. And what I mean by that is, you know, after Section 8 and Good Kid, Mad City came out, everyone's saying, this is the next thing. This is the guy that's going to come and save hip-hop. He's the savior. He's the king of the West Coast. And it's us as his fans, his audience, his consumers, that really fed into that idea and perpetuated the idea that he is going to save this art form. And like Kendrick acknowledges on this album, he's partly responsible as well, because he fed into that narrative and believed it at times. And on Mr. Morale, he goes to almost extreme lengths to dismantle that image of himself, of being this almost holy prophet-like figure, and really, really exposing his flaws as a person. And as, you know, speaking personally, as someone who, you know, has followed Kendrick since I was like 13 years old, and, you know, I'm part of those people who, you know, stands him and revered him and be like, oh my God, Kendrick, like, you know, everything he touches is gold. And I still think that's true. But I never sat back and questioned, like, surely there's no way that he is this person throughout his, you know, day-to-day life with his family and with his children. And of course he's not, because he's a human. And this album really puts into perspective some of the themes that have been alluded to throughout past Kendrick albums. And that first one, for me, being his, I guess you can call it bluntly, his sex addiction and alcohol addiction as well. If you go back to Good Kid, Mad City, the opening track, Shireen, where, you know, he almost crashes his car because he gets sent a picture of some titties. It's funny, and it fits the narrative perfectly as well, of this 17-year-old, you know, just out looking for Nookie. but it's something that runs throughout his entire discography, and it's not something new. So when I first heard, on Worldwide Steppers, when Kendrick's talking about text messaging bitches got my thumbs hurt, asked Whitney about my lust addiction, it's striking at first because you're thinking, oh my God, he's been sleeping around, what the fuck? But there's been this idea, him struggling with, I guess, an addiction, but also his ideas of sexuality for a long time. And then you go further down, you go to Pimp Butterfly and you listen to These Walls, where he talks about abusing his fame and wealth and status for the purposes of sex and revenge. And you think, is this a narrative tool? Is it poetic license? Or is it autobiographical? And I think at the end of the day, it's a bit of both. And then, of course, by the time you get to Damn, it's even more obvious with songs like Lust. It's always been like, not masked, but like wrapped up in a greater narrative and something that's easier to digest for us. And it still makes you wonder whether he's in character or not. And this new album now completely shatters that idea. It's apparent in songs that are, really, really heart-wrenching, like Mother I Sober, where he speaks about, seeing Whitney crying in the kitchen and she's praying to God after asking what she's done wrong. It's a really vivid image and it's so personal. This album's the first time that he's even mentioned Whitney by name on one of his studio albums as well. And I think that's important because his idea and his bedrock and his support system has been alluded to frequently on his albums, but never been this explicitly discussed before. And that all ties back into him dismantling this savior idea and getting to grips with... it's a strange one because it's like Kendrick knows that he's just a human. And it feeds into this idea of him dismantling his own savior image and the savior complex that we have placed upon him, but also that he has put upon himself. That idea is most explicitly discussed on tracks like Savior. And one of the bars that really struck me on Savior was where he said, the cat is up the bag, I am not your savior, I find it just as difficult to love thy neighbor. That's him simply, it's such a simple line, but in the context, it's quite powerful to me because it's him just reminding us and reminding himself that he is just another man. He's just another guy. He has the same difficulties as the rest of us, just traversing through life. But the fact that he says like the cat's out the bag, it feels to me like he was trying to hide that aspect of him. That's why the cat's out the bag. This was a secret. He was trying to be this symbol of hope for people and for the genre of hip hop and maybe for music in general. And he'd been holding on to this for so long and it'd been affecting his relationships. And he's like, okay, I have to let this go for this other thing to flourish, which is his family, which is why at the end of the album, he says, I chose me. I'm sorry I didn't save the world. So like that idea is the main thing that struck me about this album. But also, it's a big album. It's a Kendrick album. It's dense. There's a lot to get into. And one of the other things that really struck home for me was Kendrick really examining, I guess, his relationship with the idea of masculinity that he's been brought up into. Father Time is such an amazing song for a number of reasons to me, but again, like so many of these ideas can be condensed into like just a couple of bars that are like manifestos for these songs. And for me, when Kendrick says, I've got daddy issues, that's on me, I think that's so telling and it's so important because, you're not responsible for the actions of your parents or the generational traumas that have been passed down to you, but you're responsible with how you deal with them and how you react to them. So he's saying, I have daddy issues, that's on me. The fact that I'm this age now, Kendrick's 34, 35, and I'm still dealing with these things is because I didn't address them early enough. I'm doing it now, but it's been so long and it's too late that it's already affected my relationships in a big way. It's strange, it's something that I really relate to, but also don't relate to as well, because, Kendrick's talking about the ideas of masculinity passed down through his father. And, it's a very specific experience. It's a Black American experience with masculinity. Kendrick, for the first time in ages, is not in character. He's not in character on most of these songs. Like, I would say apart from Maybe We Cry Together, where it's this, super explicit, grandiose, theatrical presentation of a toxic relationship and a toxic argument. And of course, Kendrick is going above and beyond to try and say the most hurtful, ludicrous, sexist, misogynist things to his partner. But it's something that I think might be semi-autobiographical, and it's Kendrick. It relates back to the idea of masculinity, because at the end of the day, certain ideas of masculinity and toxic masculinity relates to how you view women and the women in your life as well. And he says these things that are super fucking sexist. And of course, you're like, okay, he's exaggerating it for narrative effect and for the character that he's in. But some of the points that he raises are so specific that I'm thinking there must be an element of truth in the things he's saying. Not that he necessarily believes what he's saying, but maybe at a time he believed those things. And I think that's probably what it is. I don't think he believes now that, all women can't get along and R&B bitches, why don't they feature on each other's songs? I don't think that's what he believes now. I think that's part of the sexist ideas that he was brought up in had manifested into. And he's exposing them on record, and he's saying, look, this is a real thing. A lot of people think like this. And at a time I did. And on so many songs, like, the whole idea is I need to recognize all of my faults and not try and excuse them, because, some of them are inexcusable. You just have to acknowledge them and just say, I need to do better. Now, of course, I'm not going to sit here and, dissect every single song and talk about every single aspect musically and lyrically and thematically that I love about every single song, because this video would be 3 fucking hours. I'm not going to do that. I'm just trying to get to the main meat and core ideas of Mr. Morale and what it represents and what it means to me. But yeah, that idea of Kendrick wrestling with and trying to break free of that cocoon. Thank you. That cocoon of like mental imprisonment, because you're indoctrinated into these ideas of sexism and misogyny and certain ideas of masculinity, and something that is even more strikingly approached on this album, homophobia. Now, Auntie Diaries is a song that has sparked a lot of debate amongst many, many, many people, and for very good reason. At the core of it, Auntie Diaries is a story, two stories about his trans family members and how they were treated. And just on paper, if you told me, all right, Kendrick's going to make a song about the trans experience, not the trans experience, his experience with trans family members in the hood, it's going to cause a lot of debate. It's going to cause a lot of debate from both liberal and conservative people. So you hear conservative people saying, oh, Kendrick's pushing the LGBTQ plus agenda. Why is he being so woke? Blah, blah. All that fucking bullshit. And then people that might tend to lean more left and more liberal. And this is an argument that I can understand way more than the conservative one. The main thing is that people have said, while Kendrick's intentions might have been in the right place, the way he went about it was questionable, fell flat because of his use of the F slur repeatedly and misgendering and dead naming. And I'm not gonna sit here and tell someone who is part of the LGBTQ community to don't be offended because it's a song, it's art, because that's not my experience. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna. I don't know what it's like to experience those things. So, and of course, people are gonna take issue with it, and it's not my place to say whether that's not even whether. Of course, it's justified. Like, Jesus Christ, it's not my place to tell someone that you can't be offended by something. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a big, giant, humongous proponent of freedom of speech. It's a hill I will die on, but that doesn't remove you from, open floor criticism, especially when you're in the public eye. And I think it's important. Does that mean that this song doesn't affect me? No, it still resonates with me a lot. It's one of my favorite on the album. It's maybe the one I've gone back to the most, which is strange because it's not the catchiest. It's not the one that's most danceable. It's really it's heavy. It's a heavy song. Do you know what? It's very strange. Like how I've viewed this song after listening to it so many fucking times is that it feels like the target audience of this song is basically the person Kendrick used to be in that song. Those people who are still exhibiting those beliefs now, they're the target demographic. People who may be from the same community as Kendrick, who have had these homophobic and transphobic ideas passed down to them generationally, who are still in the midst of it now and haven't had that time to, get to their 20s and 30s and 40s and look back and be like, oh, wow, that was really, really messed up. The people who are in it right now, I think that's his target audience. And I think that might be, I'm not excusing it, but that might be the reason why he chose to be so abrasive with his language. And it's a clunky way to go about it. I'll admit it. As much as I love Kendrick Lamar, it's clunky, it's imperfect, but I think maybe the main takeaway is that it's the most probably realistic portrayal of how people get to that realization that you're a person and I love you and you deserve to be treated equally. It's probably the most realistic portrayal of how one from Kendrick's community gets to that place, not the idealized way of just all of a sudden being suddenly enlightened and everything that you do is not controversial and you're going about everything the right way from doing everything the wrong way initially. We wish the world was like that, but it's not. This is how the world views human beings. Yeah, and it's one debate that has sparked from this is that people would say, it's like one of the arguments that has that I have mixed feelings about is, people saying, oh, what if Eminem or Jack Harlow made a song about, how they grew past their racism, and they continually use the word nigger in a song, but we as an audience, we're like, yeah, but we know that they're not racist. Would that excuse it? And it's kind of a moot point because that's just whataboutism. It's like, well, that didn't happen. That's not the issue we're talking about now. If it did happen, I don't know. That's the point, and it's okay to not know how to feel. I think that's the question. It's okay to have mixed feelings. It's okay to not know how to feel. It's okay for me to listen to Auntie Diaries and think, do you know what? I don't know if you were justified in using the F word so many times. I don't know. I understand it. I understand the abrasiveness and the directness and him calling out a hypocrisy. And him at the end of the day, F. Let's say it together. Only if you let a white girl say nigger. That equation of this racial slur and this homophobic slur is something that I happen to agree with, and that's why I wouldn't use that word. Yeah, but at the end of the day, like, it's an important discussion to have, but like the main thing that I get from this song is when he talks about his. It's interesting as well because I just actually only noticed this a few days ago. Is that as soon as the song switches from the story about his uncle, even though he says my auntie is a man, I don't know what gender pronouns that his auntie, he refers to him as his auntie, prefers to use, so I don't know. But when it switches from my auntie is a man now, that hook until and then it gets to Demetrius is Marianne now. As soon as he says the word Demetrius is Marianne now, it's literally to the second halfway through the song. So, he's making this, I guess, this dichotomy. It's really interesting as well because, like, the arguments that were levied against his auntie in the first half were, not they were more day-to-day microaggressions. That's what I'd call it. It felt like his community had this double standard and had this hypocrisy that they were more willing to accept a trans man than a trans woman. They were more willing to accept that his auntie is his uncle than Marianne. Because when it gets to Marianne, his cousin, he tells a story about him being in church and, the preacher being just a fucking cunt. And sorry to use the abrasive language, but that's just what it was. And it's really interesting, and that loops back into the idea of masculinity and black masculinity, because I feel like, again, like, you can draw on it from your own experiences. Like in school, if I don't know, like if a girl was portraying more traditionally masculine traits, whatever you can infer that to be, it wouldn't really be a problem, and people wouldn't really bat an eye on it. They're like, yo, yeah, she's a tomboy, blah, blah, blah. That's all it was. But then as soon as a boy or a young man displays traditionally, again, I say traditionally because these ideas are fucked, but traditionally feminine traits, people would be like, oh, what the fuck, man? That shit is gay, bruv. What the fuck? You're an F. And it's like, it's the same thing, it's just flipped. Like, they're both, diverging away from gender stereotypes, but one is demonized more than the other. Why is that? I don't know. What I do know, actually, is because the ideas of masculinity passed down from men to men is fucked up. The idea of traditional masculinity is much more rooted in ego and bravado and facade than the ideas of traditional femininity. And that's why I don't think there really is such a thing as toxic femininity. It's a masculine problem. And I think Kendrick tries his best to address some of those things in Auntie Diaries. And he's, at the end of the day, he sparks a conversation that's really important. But also what I really like so much, particularly with the first half, is that he paints this relationship he has with this trans person as just a genuine relationship. Like, it's not a idealized, romanticized, fantazed, because they are trans, they're this completely otherworldly being. No, like, this is the person that effectively inspired Kendrick to rap. They would cut his hair like any other family member, and I think that's the important thing. That idea of generational trauma is explored even more deeply on songs like Mother I Sober, which is, an even more depressing song, way more depressing. From one of the most gut-wrenching songs from Kendrick. It might be right up there with like You and Sing About Me. It's, just there's a lot he talks about in this song. Seeing his mother being a victim of abuse, and the repercussions that had on his mental health, and how he took that baggage with him into his relationships is it's fucking haunting. That's what it is. And just musically as well, it's so bare bones and sparse. Beth Gibbons' feature is fucking amazing, but the thing that really gets me is Kendrick's vocal delivery and inflection. It's like his voice is just completely gone, like completely just dejected, devoid of hope, of happiness, of everything. And that's what that trauma can do to a person. It's like the auditory equivalence of depression and PTSD. The two discs, the first disc is Big Steppers, the second disc is Mr. Morale, and Mr. Morale is noticeably more introspective and reflective than Big Steppers, because they're tap dancing around the conversation. But it's still like those themes were hinted towards at the start of the album, like on Die Hard, which is one of, I guess, the catchiest songs. I hope I'm not too late to set my demons straight. Very catchy, like pop rap R&B tune. I fucking love the song. But again, there's bars in here that really, really get to me. Like, where he says, my truth is too complicated to hide now. Can I open up? Is it safe or not? I'm afraid a little. You relate or not? Have faith a little. I might take my time. Ain't no saving grace this time. And, that idea of him, like, admitting to being self-conscious and being worried and being nervous and having some sort of anxiety about opening up truthfully. And he's saying, is it safe or not? And I think a song like Die Hard works on two levels. I mentioned it in my reaction that it's him speaking both to Whitney and to us. The reason he didn't open up about his, I guess, for example, his daddy issues, like on Father Time, is because he was worried that his partner isn't going to relate, and he held on to it, and it caused more damage than just not simply opening up. But also, is it too late to open up to us now, because we have this image of Kendrick that we've had for over 10 years now, and I guess he's, are we still going to be here? Are we still going to be this audience for him? It's a really interesting and like real-time way to approach fucking going to therapy, I guess. Like, this album, if you had to sum up this album in one word, it's Kendrick Lamar goes to therapy. That's what this album should have been fucking called. But yeah, there's so much. That's not even touching on like musically wild, absolutely wild. United in Grief sounds like he's rapping over an instrumental from The King of Limbs. I fucking love it. We Cry Together, Alchemist production, instantly recognizable. It's beautiful, it's chaotic, it's haunting, like the song and like the argument itself. Silent Hill with Kodak Black. Kendrick Lamar, he's been listening to Playboi Carti, but that is Playboi Carti. Yeah, you could do a whole separate video just on like the musicality of this, but I think the main takeaway from Mr. Morale is Kendrick dealing with his traumas and dismantling his own self-image. And I think it's quite telling as well that, like, because a lot of this album is also about Kendrick's position in the public eye, and I've been protecting my soul in the valley of silence, and he's kind of sticking true to that, because since this dropped, like, he dropped The Heart Part 5, he dropped this album, he announced a tour, haven't heard a word from him since. He's been playing FIFA in Ghana with little kids. Do you know what I mean? He's just on his own thing. He's living his life, as you should do as an artist. Your life shouldn't be this one piece of art. Do you know what I mean? He has a life outside, and kind of ironically, that has what has fed into this album. Him effectively neglecting his own mental health and family to pursue his artistic endeavor, and that's why it ends with him saying, "I chose me. I am sorry." But there's nothing to be sorry about. That's it. And finally, the last thing I want to say is like how theatrical this album is. Kendrick always employs strange vocal inflections and cadences. He said new flows come and be patient, brother, and he wasn't fucking lying. It's the most it sounds like I'm watching a play. And Kendrick is the director and the writer and the lead star. Yeah. Do you know what? I might do another video on this album, because I've spent I have a thing that tracks the amount of minutes I listen to music, and I think I've spent 1,500 or 1,600 minutes listening to this album, and there will be more. But yeah, I love this album. I love it. I'm not gonna sit here and be like it's an 8.6 out of 10. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know where it ranks amongst the other Kendrick albums. I don't really care at the moment. I'm just sitting here enjoying it and living with it. And I'm still picking up new things every day. So, when I find out that freaking Worldwide Steppers indicates that Kendrick's going to be the next Iron Man, I'll tell you about it. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers.